Some of you were asking at the break some really good questions about transitional statements. Because once you understand the diagram, how do I transition from one diagram to the other smoothly? And so let's just look at a couple of transitional statements as we come up to the point where we stop just before lunch. Here we have a tree, and this tree represents your life. These branches are various problems. We can work on the branch, but if we don't look at the root rot, the thing that's feeding the branch, just another branch is going to get bigger. So here's my transitional statement. I want to look at the root rot in you. I want to look at the root rot. That's my transition. So I just want to look at that with you. This is what I want to talk about next. To understand the root rot, I want you to understand how you're made. That you're created with a body, soul, and a spirit. You're created with spiritual needs. You were born dead to God in the spirit, and now you're going to look to others to meet those needs. So you're going to be born self-centered, looking to others to meet your needs. Here would be my transitional statement. Religion is an act of self-centeredness. So religion is an act of self-centeredness. And the person's looking at you and saying, but I'm not very religious. Well, you know, religion is an act of self-centeredness. And let me show you how that works out. Anything can be a religion that attempts to meet my needs from the outside in. When Christ wants to meet my needs from the inside out. And nothing will ever meet my needs other than Him. So I transition there. And what I'd like you to do is just look over the notebook, go through those, come up with the transitions that make the most sense for you. And how do you tie those together? Nothing's going to meet my needs other than Christ. And I'm going to emphasize that again. Now, as we go through the lectures and the lecture training, you'll notice that we're saying the same thing over and over and over again in a different way. And so you'll see the same message coming through when we talk about idols and when we talk about unbelief and when we talk about the inner and the outer man. We keep saying it a different way. And in doing that then, we look for the witness of the Spirit in that person that says, okay, I get it there. That's the point I get. So I'm saying this here that, look, I want to say it again in another way. Nothing can meet your needs but Him. And if you're talking to somebody who's in an addiction, the reason they're in the addiction is that they're looking for this thing to meet their deepest need and to fill the chasm. And the more you try, the more you need, and it never fills it. But if you could get this filled, then all of this would drop down. Now, half the people I see are unbelievers. I use the exact same material with them. And so I may not say at this point that it's Christ in you that you need. I'll just say you've got a vacuum, and what have you tried to fill it with? And how well is that going? And the more you try, the more you need. If somehow we could fill this in your heart, do you see how all of this would drop off? What are you really looking for in all of this? So the first problem we have is that I'm self-centered. My transitional statement is just remember you're transitioning into the three problems that you have being born dead to God in the Spirit. So I'm going to transition into the second thing, which says you got a second problem. And the second problem is you don't judge your thoughts or your emotions. And it's important to judge your thoughts or emotions. And here's what sanity is. You in touch with reality. Heather was asking a question, it was really a good one, that some people are going to be opposed to being told they're insane. Yeah. They're not going to like that. Yep. But if you'll define it, because definition is everything, insanity is having something in rule of your mind, will, and emotions other than reality. How do you know what you believe is reality or the truth? And so people are all insane because the only reality is Christ. And if He's not in charge, then of course you're going to be insane and you can't judge thoughts and you can't judge emotions. Our whole point is, what makes you think that you're right in what you're thinking and what you're feeling? And those carry you away. And that leads to obsessions. And so you have a lot of obsessions in your life, the things that you've moved up, and this is all you focus on. And again, That's a branch, but it may not be the root. What's the root rod in our lives? The third problem we have is that you don't know who you are. So let me give you an example. You've let other self-centered, insane people tell you who you are. You don't like it, and you try to change it. In this circle, and I start in this circle with a lecture, because often people don't know what I'm talking about if I start over here. So I'll work this way first, and then I can come back and work this way again. But people can relate to what impression do you want to leave people, and then how do you feel at your very worst? Who would want you at your very worst? And we were talking about this, whatever you are at your worst, one day you've let the people closest to you see it, and what'd they do? Yeah, they rejected you. And so now you've got to keep it covered up and treat people like this. I can't ever be free and let you see who I am because you'll reject me. So I'm hiding it all the time. How did I get this image or identity? In my self-centered, insane condition, other self-centered, insane people gave me messages about myself. Kenton Pilar and I were talking about a friend that they have, and he was an accident. His mother didn't intend to be pregnant. She wasn't married. So she's an accident. The identity message from the family and from the church and from the society is that he's an accident. Now, if you're an accident, you've got to do something to cover that up. So he's got to work himself to death to try to cover up this feeling of being an accident. And you never get to rest. You've got to justify your existence on the planet. And you're constantly controlled by other people, either those that say I'm this, they'll manipulate me, or people that say I'm this in the negative, they'll manipulate me. Now, let's go back to a problem. You mentioned a problem to me. You came in talking about a problem. We began the conference talking about problems, what the branches were. And so, we'll go to the problem. Oh, we got other diagrams there. We'll go to this one. What I want to show in this diagram, and just listen to it, is that with your image and your identity, other people are pulling the strings of your heart all the time and controlling you. I'm just saying again what I already said. On the positive and the negative, they're going to control you. And you can't live your life free because other people are controlling you. So we're just emphasizing that one more time. Now, if you're in counseling, you will have already heard how this person's being controlled and how someone else controls them. And so my husband doesn't hug me when I come home at night. Well, why does that control you? There's a legitimate and illegitimate side to that issue. He ought to hug you, but he's not hugging you. Why does that destroy you? What is that pulling in your heart, and why does it pull? That's just reiterating what we've already done. Now, when we go to this, relationships have been based on what you do and not who you are. And so if we put in this box all the relationships that you have, and I ask you this question, how do people accept you on the basis of what you do or who you are? How do they accept you? Well, it's easy to find out. Just don't give your child what they want. Here's an easy way to find out in the lectures. Turn to the person next to you, clear your throat, and spit on them. And how many people are going to go, oh, God bless you. I'm glad I sit here with you. That's wonderful. Why do people ultimately accept you? Because of what you do. And we all have a little list of the pluses that we need to do. And if we do one minus, we're going to get rejected, aren't we? And so we're constantly living on the basis of what we do. Now, if I want to bring God into this topic, because I'm getting ready to bring God into it, in the last, next to the last diagram of this section, I want to bring God into this, but I want to warm people up to God. Because I know they're doing this with Him, and we're going to talk later on why they're doing this. But you've still got to warm them up to the idea of God. bringing him into the whole picture. If every relationship has been based on what you do, and relationship with God is what we're talking about, how will we naturally believe the relationship, or what will we believe the relationship is based on? On behavior. Do you know the easiest way to preach is to give lists of behavior, because that goes right along with everyone's flesh? The cheapest preaching there is preaching of condemnation and just giving you lists of what you don't do, because you flow with that perfectly. And we'll say this over and over again, when the right thing is said so long, the wrong thing is said so long that the right thing starts sounding wrong. Amen. And so it's really hard to get it through my head that this relationship with Him isn't based on what I do. And not only that, if people gave me a list this long over here, how long is God's list over here? You know, I'm amazed of the good news of saying that God accepts you because of birth and not your behavior. And yet, the person who teaches legalism in a list will get a greater response. And people are just madly taking notes on everything they need to do. And if they did it all, they would expect God's love and forgiveness. Now, you've discovered this in your own life. Here's a pipe and the water's flowing through it. And you want to get a drink down here. Is there any difference between blocking the pipe here or here or here? No, either way, you're not going to get a drink. The revealed love of God wants to flow to you. And wherever you have a standard that says His love will stop is where you've stopped it. And it wouldn't matter if you stop it here or here or here. And whenever you have a standard and you say this, God would love me until I do that, you better look out, because you're going to do it. God will love me till I do this. You're going to do it. Because that statement is what's hindered the love of God in your life. And until you get that right, you can't freely move in Him. I have to know that His love for me and acceptance isn't based on what I do for me to continue in this Christian walk, because I'm going to keep screwing up. And we've already said this, you only learn in contrast. Well, would you like the peace of God, or the peace of God? Well, thanks, I'll just have the peace of God since that's all you're offering. Well, you can't learn anything. The peace of God doesn't mean anything to you until you have turmoil. How can you say, oh, I feel so stupid that I wasted so much of my life thinking that way when I should have been thinking that way if I hadn't have been thinking that way? The flesh sets up a contrast to the Spirit so I can know the things of the Spirit. He can't teach me without contrast. I have to have all that. And my point in that is then, I'm going to learn more in my flesh than I would if I didn't have flesh. Does that make sense? How do you know the things of God without flesh? How do you know the things of the Spirit without flesh? You can't know them. So in that room that we're talking about, where you go from being Adam and Eve in the garden before they sin, over here to being children of God that are a bride, in that room there has to be flesh and failure and contrast, or you can't learn. Now, if that's an absolute, would you agree with me? There's no other way to learn other than in that room? Then if you don't have a concept that He accepts me because of birth and not behavior, I'm done. Because the very method He's using to teach me has taken me out in that concept. I've got to get this firmly fixed that He loves me. Now, you don't believe that He does, and that's why He's been letting all of you fail. And that's why you've broken about every standard that the Christians are going to break. And you stand here and go, you know what? He hasn't given up on me. They said to me in Brazil, yeah, but you know, God wants obedience, and He doesn't like divorce, and He doesn't like adultery, and He doesn't like drunkenness. I know all that, but people have done it. Now what? I mean, now what? I'm not arguing the point. I'm arguing the now what. Am I hopeless? Am I not going to go anywhere now? Am I done? Is that the end of me? But see, I don't see that. I see in that room, and I count all things as rubbish in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. And that includes everything. my children and my marriage and my righteousness and everything else. I don't care. I'm going to exit here one day and I want to know Him. That's it, period. You're going to fail. You're going to have these mistakes. Do you believe He's loving you all the way through it? That He's taking you? That acceptance is not going to be based on behavior and this endless list. And you know, the funny thing is, when you get into abiding life, recognizing Christ, recognizing life, you're ruined for the club of the half-converted.
Amen. Yeah. You can't do it again.
You can't do it again. You can't do it. As I was sharing at lunch, you're a hybrid creature. There are things that just deal with flesh. Sex just has to do with flesh. There's no sex in heaven. There's things in heaven for angels. There's just spiritual things. You're a hybrid. Do you know that you have things on the earth that affect heaven? And you have hybrid teachings that only apply to you. They don't apply to anyone else. They don't apply to the world. They don't apply to an unbeliever. Here's one. If you give, you're storing up riches in heaven. That's a hybrid teaching. That belongs to the hybrid. To me, that doesn't belong to anyone else. It doesn't belong to an unbeliever. He's an unbeliever. He isn't storing up any riches in heaven doing that. There's things that can't be discerned except as a hybrid. Communion's one of them. Communion is something I'm doing on the earth that has an impact in heaven. There's all of those kind of teachings that only apply to me. I have to see my acceptance in Him and not be given to these lists. And once you see that, you can't listen to the lists anymore. They just irritate you. Now, I'm not mad at the club, because Christians should have their clubs. And we need the club, and if you think the club is what's going to fix you, you need to keep going to the club till you see it won't fix you, and then turn to Him. And begin to recognize what the church is, and recognize our fellowship, and go with that. You're ruined once you get into this, because you can't take the list anymore. And here's the thing that I have a hard time communicating. I believe in keeping all these things. I believe in all of them, but I believe He keeps them through me. And I believe they're to make me happy, not to give me an acceptance by Him. You're going to fail. You're going to mess up. Acceptance is based on Him. So we've talked about you're born dead to God in the Spirit, you're self-centered, you're insane, you're controlled by an identity, and you've received identity messages about yourself. You've looked to other people to meet your needs, and when they met Him, you might have felt good, and when they didn't meet Him, you felt bad. And one of the main things you've done is tried to perform to get people's acceptance. And as you perform to get their acceptance, all relationships have been based on, and this is where we go back to the diagram, all relationships are based on what you do, not who you are. And so you do, and one minus you get rejected. Now I want to talk to you about God, and if all relationships are based on what you do, how will you naturally believe He accepts you? Because of what you do. But He doesn't accept you because of what you do. He accepts you on the basis of behavior. And why is that important? Or birth, yeah. Why is that important? Because you've been messing up all along until now. And we're going to talk more about how you've been messing up. You've been messing up, and it hasn't changed Him one bit. There is not such a thing in this life as God's separation. God never separates Himself from man. Man can only separate himself from God. We're born on the vine, connected. The book of life's used 5 times in the Bible, and nowhere is anyone's name ever put in. They're only taken out. Now, of course, there was a writing of the book, so if a writing of the book, the names had to be put in. But names are never, at that point after that, they're not put in. They're only taken out. I'm brought into Him, and I can't separate. He can't separate Himself from me, but I can separate myself from Him. And do you know what? In our own hearts, we separate ourselves because we believe it's based on behavior. I haven't been good enough, and I'm waiting for Him to reject me. Relationships based on what I do. You think it's based on what you do by God, but it's not. It's based on birth, and it's based on Him. And He isn't going to reject you because of what you do. You are failing, but He never rejects you in the midst of the failure. Okay, write a sentence on that.
We are performance-based creatures, and all our relationships are based on behavior, so we naturally think that our relationship with God is based on behavior or what we do. But God accepts us based on our birth, who we are, rather than what we do.
Okay? Right. You really want to have fun sometime. You have the person who's struggling with homosexuality tell you the whole thing and then do this. Boring. Boring. So you struggle with it. So what? What does that mean to me? What is that supposed to mean? Why are you telling me that? Well, what's it mean? Well, it means God isn't happy with me. You telling me if you weren't a homosexual, you'd be just thrilled with you? Just be absolutely thrilled with your flesh if you weren't a homosexual? Is that what you're telling me? You know, it's boring. It's boring. It's boring. It's boring. It's not based on that. That's not what it's on. I mean, get off of that. You've got it right here, just like we just got through talking about. And it's a big deal to you, but it is not a big deal to Him. He knew that was going to happen. He died for that. And you know the luxury of God, since He died for sin, He now uses it. It's His tool. It's His thing. He can work with it.